Yo, I decided to do some video content because video content is rather easy to do once you set everything up. Before that, yeah, it's a fucking pain. But now that everything is set up, I hope I can just pump out some videos because, yeah, videos are just kind of cool. So, I obviously want to talk about stats because stats are cool. I do instance labs. And I like stats, I like numbers. So today I want to talk about passive and aggressive playstyles actually, and like what passive and aggressive playstyles are, what are passive and aggressive players, how can you see that in the numbers, and how can we use that to describe a team and maybe model a team and maybe even find flaws in how a team was built. It's something I do quite often. It's quite the basic thing with passive and aggressiveness. I created this wonderful overlay, I guess. Maybe I'll do something better one day, but yeah. So passive and aggressive playstyles. What is a passive or aggressive player? The definition is quite easy, right? An aggressive player is someone who takes a lot of fights. He probably gets more kills than the average player because he's aggressive, right? And he probably also dies more, or one of those two. That's an aggressive player. And on the other hand, a passive player is someone who doesn't take a lot of fights. He probably dies less, but he probably also kills less because of it. That's a passive player. And you can obviously not categorize every single player as either passive or aggressive. There's obviously like this gray area in between. You have this kind of spectrum, right? But if you actually can say player A is aggressive or player B is passive, that's actually quite the cool thing if you do this like for a whole team or even for a whole event. For a whole tournament, because just having different categories helps you quite a lot in depending on what you want to do. So what does it mean for the statistics? And this is also quite easy because the conceptualization is so basic, right? If you're aggressive, I basically said that already. If you're aggressive, you get more kills, you probably die more. If you're passive, you get less kills, you probably die less. And that's it. So it's very easy, it's very intuitive, and you can actually do a lot with it, as it turns out, in Overwatch. So if we look at this example, I want to look at Zenyatta plays in Overwatch League, and I just queried over all Zenyatta players, and I'll put all the queries I used into the description below, so you can check them out if you want. But yeah, if you check out all the Zenyatta players, and if you want to just check if a player is passive or aggressive, not really care if he's good or not, because that's also one thing, right? You can be passive or you can be aggressive, but that doesn't mean passive is good, and it also doesn't mean aggressive is good. It depends on your team environment. It depends on well, we come to that later actually. So just let's look at the example. If we look at all Zenyatas, we can just look through and actually sometimes it's easier to look at PTK and PTD because this is compared to the team, right? Percentage of team skills, percentage of team staffs. So it doesn't really matter if the team wins a lot because that is compared to the whole team. We can see Jonah gets a lot of kills and he actually dies more, so he dies 6% more, he gets 26% more kills than the average Zenyatta, and in just kills and deaths, this was in kill share and death share, and in kills and deaths that's basically the same, so he's probably an aggressive player. We can look through and we will see all kinds of different things. What, and I actually prepared another slide for that, or another page for that, so we can look at 4 plays in specific. First of all, we can look at Shaz. Shaz gets less kills, and he dies less. He's probably a passive player. Nico gets tons of kills, and he dies more. In PTK he actually doesn't get as many more kills, but he also dies more. So he's probably an aggressive player. Boombox, on the other hand, is probably a passive player. He doesn't get as many kills, he focuses on healing more, and that's alright. And we can also look at Harry Hook, who only played 4 hours of Zenyatta, but Harry Hook, it kind of looks like that he's aggressive, because he has 3% more kills and 8% more deaths, but really he is basically nothing, because it's kind of close to the average, and his team didn't really do well, so the deaths would be lower if his team would perform better. So in general he's probably, he might be aggressive, but it's probably that he's like somewhere in between, right? He's neither really, or it's hard to say, at least. The most obvious examples for Boombox, it's hard to say as well, really. The most obvious examples here are Shaz and Nico, who are quite passive and quite aggressive. And you can do that with all kinds of different heroes. You want to do that by hero, obviously. You can't. It's like normally. Actually, I have another page for that. Normally, if you do that for players who play a lot of different heroes, you will see that sometimes, not all the time, but I think often, rather than, it turns out that they are more often rather than not aggressive on all heroes, or passive on all heroes. It's kind of the player's playstyle. If you look at Babybay and Birdwing in specific, Babybay seems to be a very aggressive player. He's aggressive on Pharah, on Soldier, on McCree. Well, his Genji isn't really that good, apparently, in terms of raw numbers. Obviously, just being bad in numbers doesn't always mean that you're bad. One example is Fergie. I think Fergie is actually great, even though his numbers look fucking awful. But well, Babybay is kind of aggressive everywhere, right? He dies more and he gets more kills. So, most of the time. And on the other hand, we have Birdwing, who's kind of passive everywhere, except on McCree where he's kind of shit. But he dies less, he gets less kills, so he's kind of a more passive player in general. That's the cool thing, in general, not just on one hero, but in general. And you can kind of work with that. If you look at different teams or different players, you can use that to create teams that have specific playstyles. And I have this one concept where I like to model teams just by passiveness and aggressiveness in terms of their players. And I have this kind of rule of thumb where I always say that a team should have at least 2 aggressive tanks or supports, and at maximum 1 aggressive DPS player. And obviously there are exceptions where this doesn't really fit, but if you look at different teams, you will kind of see that the teams that do better actually fulfill this rule. And a lot of teams fulfill this rule, to be fair. But those who don't fulfill the rule are kind of doing worse most of the time. And I would have to do more research and check. I didn't check all Overwatch League teams, for example. I want to do that soon, to just see which teams fulfill the rule, which teams do it to which degree, and how good did they do. Just to see if this kind of rule of thumb that I just came up with, basically, if this really is true. And we can look at some teams. For example, we can look at Seoul Dynasty. And if we look at Seoul Dynasty, we can say Dynasty, whatever. We can see that Fledder is, let's just ignore Bunny. Or the Bunny is neither really, he's like average in terms of kills and deaths. And we'll just look at PTK and PTD here because Seoul obviously won more. So if a team is winning a lot or losing a lot, you rather want to look at PTK and PTD rather than kills and deaths. Because kills and deaths, if you win a lot, your kills will be better, your deaths will be better. If you lose a lot, both will be worse. So at that point, just look at the shares, PTK and PTD, if you want to look for aggressiveness. And Fledder obviously is a PTK king. He got 50% PTK when he was on Flashlights against in 2 matches against MVP Space, which is fucking insane. So he got half of his team's kills. And on Seoul Dynasty as well, he has 31%, 32% on Farah PTK. So he gets almost 1/3 of his team's kills. And he also doesn't die a lot. Fledder is just a beast actually. But you could say he's aggressive or he gets tons of kills. Maybe the rule of thumb would be better if you want to say you want to have a fragger or like at least 2 support/tanks that frag a lot. I don't know, I have to think about it more, but right now I'm using aggressiveness for this rule of thumb. But if you look at it, okay, Fledder, let's say aggressive. Guido, not really doing good actually. Guido also didn't play a lot, so let's ignore Guido as well. Then we have Cookie. Well, rather passive actually. He doesn't get a lot of kills. Miro, definitely a passive player. Miro might be like a weak link of Seoul Dynasty right now. Who knows? But yeah, Miro, kind of a passive player. Munchkin, not really fragging a lot. Jaehong, not really fragging a lot. In the past he was one of the best known aggressive flag supports. He isn't anymore. Toby was as well. I don't know what happened, but Toby on Lucio is rather passive at the moment, not really aggressive. The meta just changed so much, I guess. But like Seoul Dynasty, okay. Let's not show emails. Seoul Dynasty doesn't have like an aggressive support right now, right? Jaehong and Toby are both rather passive. It's not, let's say, aggressive. Jaehong actually is doing bad in general. You can't really say, he's probably like in the middle, but more to passiveness. Toby is rather passive, weirdly enough. Then Miro is passive, and the only really aggressive tank/support that I have is Zumba. Zumba is hella aggressive, to be fair. So Seoul Dynasty doesn't fulfill the rule anymore, and they are actually doing worse. So maybe there's some connection. In the past, when they were Lunatic High, Jaehong and Toby were known as 2 of the most aggressive support players, and Seoul Dynasty was, or not Seoul Dynasty, Lunatic High was the team that consistently had the most support kills. They don't anymore. Something changed. It might simply be the meta or something in the team, something of the team working. I think it's I think it's connected to Esker not being there anymore. But Seoul Dynasty doesn't fulfill the rule anymore. It's a rule anymore. This rule of thumb, and they're actually doing worse. Just one kind of example. What do I have? I have as another example. Let's just look at New York. And I don't really remember why, but let's look at New York. New York, Arc, passive. You can see that. He's okay. We can ignore Mercy, but if you look at Lucio, low kills, low deaths, passive. Janus, not really extreme, just in the middle. Jonek, is fucking extreme. Like, he's a beast. He gets tons of kills. He also dies more. So Jonak, aggressive support, probably the most aggressive flex support in the league. Compared with Arc, this kind of works well right now. Then we have Libero. I can't really see any pattern there. Mano is a rather aggressive tank, or just, he's not at the very extreme, but he's more aggressive than he's passive. He gets way more kills and he dies less, if that makes sense. So he's rather aggressive. Meko not really anything, and Sabiobi rather passive than aggressive, especially on Tracer, and Tracer is his main hero. So actually, if you look at this, Mano is aggressive. Jonak is aggressive for 2 players basically. So you have this, they kind of fulfill the rule. You have 2 aggressive, or let's say 2, because Jonak kind of counts as 1.5 and Mano as a half. So you kind of have 2 aggressive tanks / supports, and you have at maximum 1 aggressive DPS player, and I think they actually have no aggressive DPS player. York right now. Let's see. I need to watch the matches more closely to say this, but it looks like they don't really have a super aggressive DPS player, which Lunatic High also had in the past when they were so dominant. So maybe it's even the key to not have an aggressive DPS player. I have to look at this more, and oh yeah, actually we come to that later as well. It kind of is true. But yeah, they fulfill the rule. They're doing quite well right now. What else do I have? I have Shanghai Dragons apparently. Well, let's go through Shanghai real quick. We can ignore Mercy. He's altering a passive Moira. Dia, not really anything. 5 King, passive Lucio. 3 Field, passive then. Like, super passive. MG, aggressive Diva, super aggressive. Undead, definitely an aggressive player. And Roshan, just a bad player. And Zusha, not really anything. So like they basically only have MG and Undeads that are doing well, that are fragging a lot, and they don't fulfill the rule apparently. So Diva player is the only one that is aggressive for the tank / supports. Everyone else for the supports and tanks is super passive, and Roshan is bad. Sorry. And well, they have this one DPS player, but they don't fulfill the rule. They are not doing well. I really need to look at all the Overwatch League teams to just see if this rule of thumb is working. Because I talked about this so much already, that if it's actually true, if it kind of is true, I would feel super good about myself. No narcissism. Yeah, last team I had is Valiant. Valiant is different because they don't really have an aggressive support. White, Verbo, passive, Anko, nothing. Karif, passive. But they have 2 aggressive tank players. They have Fate and Envy. Both are aggressive tank players. They have Soon, who's not really anything, and Agility is like rather passive apparently, but they have 2 aggressive tank players, and it kind of works. They're one of the better Western teams. So it even works if you have 2 tank players and not 1 tank, 1 support. That's why I think that having I looked at a lot of things in the past. I looked at Apex 3, Apex 4, Season 3 and Season 4, and it kind of turned out that having 2 aggressive DPS tank / support players is kind of the key. And I guess, was my face in the way all this time? Well, I guess that's alright. You'll see what you'll probably get what I mean. Yeah, last page I had is this PTK page, so you kind of can see this page is kind of like a mini version of what you can do with your head. It's probably better to just look at it yourself, but if you want to get a summary, you can just look at the PTK page, and it tells you which positions get a lot of kills. So you can kind of see Valiant has this kind of thing where the tanks get a lot of kills, and Seoul is really close to the average. They are not really anything. It's kind of weird. New York is obviously very support heavy, and actually if you look at the whole PTK model, that's what I called it, the thing is that normally the teams that have less kill share with their DPS players do better. As you can see, we have up here Valiant, Spitfire, Excelsior, Boston, Gladiators, Seoul, all top 7 teams. The only exception in Overwatch League is Fusion. Fusion is the only team that's doing well, even though their DPS are getting a lot of kills. Normally, if your teams don't get a lot of kills, you win. I wrote 2 articles about this. One's called like Tank and Support Players Win Championships, and the other is called something else, but yeah. And you can use this whole model just to see kind of where the whole style falls. You can see Shanghai is they might have one aggressive tank player, but they don't have an aggressive support. They have aggressive DPS players. Philly doesn't have an aggressive tank, or at least maybe they are aggressive, but they don't get a lot of kills. It's not really everything of this aggressive passiveness, but it's kind of a summary. So yeah, just to sum it up, I just wanted to talk about what aggressiveness is, what passiveness is, and that this kind of rule of thumb exists. I have to validate it more, I have to look for evidence a little bit more, if I have time at some point. But it's just a cool thing to think about, because it's so basic, right? It's so incredibly basic. Just getting a lot of kills and and dying more means aggressive, and it actually tells you a lot about the team. And most of the time, you want to have a team that has 2 aggressive tank/support players. So if you're on a team that doesn't have that, you probably want to change something, probably bring in another player, because changing a player from aggressive to passive is not really possible, because that's just their playstyle. It also doesn't mean that they're good or bad, it's just their playstyle. You just have to build the team around it, I think. And yeah, passiveness, aggressiveness, it's a great thing. And this rule of thumb is just, hopefully it works. I have to validate it. I will actually look at all Overwatch League teams at some point, very soon, and just to check if this whole rule of thumb works. But just to reiterate it, you want to have at least 2 aggressive tank/support players, and you want to have at maximum 1 aggressive DPS players. And that's all I have to say in this video. More will come soon, hopefully. See you next time.